This video will introduce the Storm Hazard Projection Tool. Now the Storm Hazard Projection Tool, or SHP tool for short, is always accessible from your dashboard. Again, you will have three ways to interact with storm hazard projections. One is if there's an active storm in the Atlantic Basin, this tracker will update with projections of that storm's impact on the state, and you can click the link to view those projections. Since we have no active storms, there are no storms to view here, but the manual shows you some examples of what this mock-up will look like when a storm is actually active near the coast. The other ways to launch the tool through Explore Simulations is just to again see all the tools that the simulations that have been saved from this tool. But the more important feature we want to explore in this video is actually how to run a simulation. So if I click Run New Simulation here, I'm going to come into a map that's centered on my municipality. I'm going to zoom out a bit so I can see the coast. And what we're going to do right now is called a custom storm simulation. Now when there's an active storm, the tool is automatically going to run and do the simulation for you. You don't need to do any kind of work. So the only time that you would be using all of the features I'm about to show you right now is when you want to run a scenario yourself. And you want to play with the tool to look at different hurricane scenarios as part of a planning process or a tabletop exercise or part of some emergency management drills that you want to conduct and see how to use the tool in that situation. So what we're going to do is what's called a custom storm simulation. I'm going to use the tool to make my own storm. And the way I do that is the following. The first thing you do is you come over into the tool and you take a look at the coast, and your first choice is, where is this storm making landfall? Where is this hurricane going to hit? And I select that by typing in the latitude and longitude in decimal degrees of the point where it's going to make impact. And if I don't want to type it, I can actually just do it by clicking and dragging this symbol here. This little X symbol is where it makes landfall. So let's say I have the storm making landfall right here. The second thing I do is I can pick the angle that the storm is going to hit at. Now notice that this thing swings to represent all the angles of every storm that's ever hit New Jersey. So they tend to track this way or come into the coast and strike this way. So the arrow is showing the direction that the storm is striking at. So if I want the storm to be coming like this and hitting these barriers, I'm going to orient my arrow this way, but I can also change that angle. So I can do that just by clicking and with my mouse sliding that back and forth. You'll notice while I'm doing this, the gray box is updating here. It's showing you the changes in angle. And so I can type my answers here, or I can just grab and slide this little orange tool around to put my storm landfall point and the angle with which the storm is hitting just by clicking and playing with this arrow. Now, once I've set where the storm landfall scenario is that I want to look at, so I'm going to zoom out a bit and see that. The next thing I'm going to do is pick my interface. Am I going to put in basic storm information or advanced information? I would say that most users are interested just in a basic simulation. What a basic simulation does is it considers the intensity of the storm based on the category level, category 1 to 5. So I pick what kind of storm. So if I want to say, well, I want to consider a category 5 striking right here and see what the impacts are, I would just pick Cat 5 by clicking on that little circle. Then if I have more information, and most users would not do this, but if I had more information, I would come here to the Advanced tab. And here I could actually put in 3 important pieces of data about a storm. Its translational speed in knots, its pressure differential, that's the difference between atmospheric pressure and the actual pressure at the center of the storm, and that's noted in units of millibars, and the size of the storm, which is called the radius of maximum winds, and we say that in miles. Again, I can type my answers in these boxes or just click and drag the slider to adjust my answers for any of these. Now, the reason we have the advanced settings is because we can simulate storms with exact parameters just like these, and whenever you have an active storm in the Atlantic Basin coming towards New Jersey, we are actually pulling these 3 numbers from the National Hurricane Center, which is why we have this advanced capability available. So we can track and simulate the exact storm coming at you. But for scenario planning, you probably don't want to do this. You don't even know some of these values. So it's much easier to use the Basic tab and just make selections here. Another thing about the Basic tab is by picking one of these categories, we have simulated for you, for example, all the Category 5 scenarios that we could find that would replicate this landfall that you've selected. So this is a very intelligent tool. It's going to select for you the right information from our database to do a simulation for you simply based on the intensity of the storm, Category 1 to 5. The other cool thing about this interface is once you pick the category, it will also adjust the angle if needed, so it captures what the typical angle is for that category of storm at that location. So really all you need to know to use the Basic tab is the location where you want the storm to hit and the strength. And with that information, the system will take care of everything else for you. Now, whether you use the Advanced tab or the Basic tab, all users also have some scenarios that they can select in addition to the storm features to explore different impacts. So let's take a look at what those 5 things are. The first I want to introduce is sea level rise. We have a slider bar here that you can drag, or you can type numbers again, to put up to 4.5 feet of sea level rise into your scenario. So for future planning, you may want to consider this, and this is the range of sea level rise that's anticipated to be coming over the next 100 years. We also have a coastal protection scenario here. If you want to see the impact of your dunes being degraded, so that has their elevation dropped by 50%, or completely compromised, a breach, you can press these buttons and enable that feature. Now this is only available right now in Berkeley Township and the Borough of Kingsburg, our 2 pilot municipalities, but this is another scenario that's available for those users and over time perhaps for other users. The other feature we have available for all users is the effective tides. You can take a look at a high tide scenario or a typical or average tide scenario or no tide by clicking these buttons. And you can run all of these situations to look at your scenario with additional, again, details. But I'm going to turn off sea level rise. I'm going to say let's assume the dunes stay as they are and let's ignore tides for now. The other thing I can do is I can select an advanced scenario. If I pick deterministic, it means that whatever storm track I've picked, the landfall and the category, the system's just going to run that answer. But let's say that I want to consider how much or how I would respond to a storm, let's say 2 days away from landfall, and make plans with my emergency management team on how to get ready for that storm, knowing that in 2 days, 48 hours, that storm could actually change a lot. Its track can move a lot because there's a lot of uncertainty in the forecast from the National Hurricane Center 48 hours before landfall. So if I want to explore that, I can come up here and move this time to landfall bar to, let's say, 48 hours, right? And I can do that again by typing the number or by sliding with the slider bar. So now I'm here, I've got 2 days before landfall. I can pick probabilistic as an option in my simulation, and that would take a look at all the different ways the storm track could deviate from the track from the National Hurricane Center. So all the ways that the storm could shift and swing and intensify and move, that's all going to be simulated by the system and factored into the display that you see, so that you're able to see the expected outcome if the storm would happen to move and change its track, as well as the extreme, the worst case scenario if the storm changed. What would be the worst case impact we would see? And that can be very valuable as you're considering 48 hours out how to prepare. And then you can repeat the simulation as the storm gets closer to think about how you would modify your response. So we would pick a probabilistic scenario to consider all the uncertainties, all the ways the storm might change before landfall, and we would pick a time, something greater than 0 hours, so maybe 1 or 2 days before landfall, and we could use that with the probabilistic setting to take a look at how much the storm could change and how we might factor that into our preparations. So again, to recap, users should be picking landfall location, the intensity of the storm using our basic or advanced tab, and then scenarios of their choosing. And if you don't want to consider the track changing before landfall, you don't care about sea level rise, you don't care if your dunes are lost, or you don't care about tides, just put those to the default setting. And if you don't care about how much the storm track might change before landfall, run it as what we call deterministic. And then you click Perform Calculation, and you'll see a spinning wheel that indicates that this calculation is running now by the system, considering the information that you've given it, and it'll take a few minutes to come back to you. Once the analysis concludes, the spinning wheel will disappear, and you'll start to see results on the map. By checking the checkbox, you can load in the different heat maps and visualizations for the different types of hazards. And you can visualize the wind field, which is the wind speed over the state, the levels of storm surge that were anticipated for the scenario you selected, as well as the total wave run-up over land. I'm going to zoom in right now and just talk a little bit about storm surge. So if I check only that button and kind of zoom in, I'll show you the way storm surge is visualized by the system. Storm surge has a series of contours that are important for decision making. The red contour shows you where the storm surge takes on a height of 9 feet. The orange line will show you where the storm surge takes on a height of 6 feet. The yellow line showing you where the storm surge takes on a height of 3 feet. And the blue line showing you where the storm surge takes on basically the height of around 1 foot. And so what this gives you an indication of is how far inland you have to go before you would reach what we call the wet-dry boundary, where anywhere inland from this blue line, the storm surge has not reached in this particular scenario that we just ran. So this is how you can use the storm surge visualization and these 3 colored contours to make decisions about the impact of storm surge in the scenario that you've run. Now, once you complete running your scenario and you click on and off the different layers to visualize the winds as well as the storm surge, you can click these on and off to visualize these features, the run-up. After doing so, you can save your result by clicking this button, Save Results, and you can name your simulation, right? So I can do a test simulation, Berkeley, and I could explain that this was so I can give a little bit of a name and description to it. I hit save, and now I've saved that particular simulation. If I want to bring that simulation into one of the maps that I've been working with, I can also do that here. I can add that result to a map, and if I do that, this storm is now going to be loaded in for display on my map, and I can see it here. So I have this storm present along with other storms that I've simulated before, and I can turn the different results off. And any storm that I've loaded into a map, it's displaying here. So let's say I don't want this old simulation, I just want the one I just did. Then you can control the visualization through your map and turn those storm events back on or off. And you'll always see a summary of what that simulation was displayed here. And you can tuck that away if you don't want it anymore. So this is a way to actually bring one of your simulations into your map view, and there's a separate video on the map view to talk more about this. The other thing I wanted to say is after you've run a simulation and saved it, if we come back to the dashboard, you can always go back and see any of the simulations you've done by coming back to your dashboard. And by Explore Simulations, you can come here and you'll see the simulations you've completed. You can see the one that we just ran together right now. And I can always come back to that simulation, and if I want to take a look at it again, I can bring it into a map and have a look at it and come into that map and play with that simulation some more. And every time you bring a simulation into a map, you'll see it displayed right here, and you'll see it appear under the user specified scenario. That means it's telling you that this is a run that you simulated with information you had versus a storm that might be active that the system is tracking. And here's an example of what that looks like. Again, we have a separate video on the map tool where we'll talk more about this, but this just shows you how to use the storm hazard projection tool to run a simulation, how to save that result, and how to bring that result into a map so you can start working with it using some of the map features that we'll talk about in our other video.